The call came on a Tuesday morning, and I remember thinking how strange it was that my whole life could come apart on a Tuesday. Not a Friday, when everything feels like it's already unraveling anyway. Not a Monday, which at least has the decency to warn you that something bad might happen. A Tuesday. I was standing in my kitchen in Greenville, South Carolina, pouring my second cup of coffee and watching the Cardinals at the feeder my wife had put up 3 summers ago, the one she said I'd hung 6 inches too low but never asked me to move. My name is Russell Holt. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years working as a structural engineer for a firm out of Charlotte, and I retired 2 years ago thinking the hardest part of my life was behind me. I had a pension. I had a house that was almost paid off. I had a wife of 26 years named Diane, a daughter named Stephanie who lived 40 minutes away with her husband, and a son-in-law I had never completely trusted but had learned to tolerate at holidays. I thought I was settled. I thought the word settled meant something permanent. The phone showed a number I didn't recognize, a local area code, but not a contact in my phone. I almost let it go to voicemail. I do that more than I used to. I've gotten particular about my mornings since I retired, and I don't like anything interrupting that first hour with my coffee. But something made me answer. I still can't explain what. Is this Russell Holt? A woman's voice, professional, slightly formal. It is, I said. Mr. Holt, this is Carol at Piedmont Heritage Bank. I'm calling because, and I want to be delicate here, your wife is currently at our branch on Pelham Road. She's with a gentleman, and the two of them are requesting a wire transfer from your joint savings account. The amount is substantial. She paused. I'm only calling because Mr. Holt, the man with her, doesn't quite match the photo we have on file. And when I mentioned that, your wife became very insistent. Our branch manager wanted someone to make contact before we proceeded. I set my coffee cup down on the counter. The Cardinals were still at the feeder. Everything in the kitchen looked exactly the same as it had 30 seconds ago. I'm sorry, I said slowly. My wife is on a business trip. She left yesterday morning for Raleigh. She's presenting at a conference through Thursday. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mr. Holt, she is here. In our lobby, right now. I know what it feels like when a building has a structural problem. I've stood in rooms where something was fundamentally wrong with the load-bearing walls and felt it before I could see it. A wrongness, a pressure in the air that the untrained eye would miss entirely. Standing in my kitchen on that Tuesday morning, I felt something very similar, like the floor beneath me had shifted a quarter inch to the left, and would never shift back. Don't do anything, I said. Do not process that transfer. I'm leaving right now. Pelham Road is 11 minutes from my house on a normal day. I made it in 7. I don't remember most of the drive. I remember turning onto Augusta Street and thinking I should call Diane, and then thinking no, if she was truly in Raleigh, she would tell me I was confused, and if she wasn't in Raleigh, I didn't want to give her any warning at all. I remember the parking lot of Piedmont Heritage coming into view and seeing her car immediately, her white Honda CR-V, the one with the faded Clemson sticker in the back window that she'd been meaning to replace since 2019. I sat in my truck for a moment, hands on the wheel, and I made myself breathe. Then I called Carol back. I'm in the parking lot, I said. Before I come in, can you tell me anything else about the man she's with? He's younger, Carol said carefully. Mid-30s, I'd estimate. Dark hair. He presented an ID when we asked, but our manager felt the situation warranted a call. Mid-30s. I was 63. Diane was 59, mid-30s. I walked into that bank the way I used to walk into job sites when I knew something was wrong, deliberately, calmly, with my face giving nothing away. The lobby was cool and smelled like recycled air and new carpet. There were 4 teller windows, a waiting area with chairs, a row of offices along the back wall, And there, seated at the second office from the left, visible through the glass partition, was my wife of 26 years. She was wearing the blue blazer she packed for the conference. The conference in Raleigh. The conference she'd kissed me goodbye for yesterday at 7:15 in the morning. She was sitting across from a man I had never seen in my life, and they were leaning toward each other with the comfortable ease of two people who had been in close quarters many times before. A woman in her 40s came toward me. Carol, I assumed she had the look of someone who had made a difficult phone call and was now bracing herself for the aftermath. "Mr. Holt," she said quietly, "thank you for coming in. I'd like a moment," I said, "before you take me in there." She nodded. She understood. I stood by the door and I watched them through the glass for maybe 90 seconds. The man had a folder on the desk in front of him. He was talking, gesturing towards something on a page, and Diane was nodding. She was nodding the way she nodded when she agreed with something. I knew that nod. I had watched that nod across kitchen tables and restaurant booths and doctor's office waiting rooms for 26 years. She was nodding at a man I'd never seen, in a bank I had co-signed every account at, signing papers she hadn't mentioned to me. I had made a decision before I walked through that glass door. I would not raise my voice. I would not make a scene. I had spent my career in rooms where panic caused disasters, and I was not going to panic now. What I needed was information, and information required control. I pushed the door open. Diane's face, when she saw me, went through 4 distinct expressions in less than 2 seconds: surprise, recognition, fear, and then, the one that hurt the most, a very quick, very practiced rearrangement into something neutral, like she had rehearsed for this possibility. The man turned around. He was younger than I'd imagined, even from Carol's description. 32, maybe 33, with the kind of easy confidence that comes from never having had to really fail at anything. He didn't look guilty. He looked annoyed. "Russell," Diane said, "what are you doing here?" I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. I didn't look at the man yet. I looked at my wife. "I got a call from the bank," I said. "They were concerned about some unusual activity on our account." I kept my voice even. "What are you doing here, Diane?" "I thought you were in Raleigh." The conference was rescheduled. I was going to call you. What's being transferred?" She glanced at the man beside her. He shifted in his seat. "It's an investment opportunity," he said. I turned and looked at him directly for the first time. "I don't believe I was speaking to you," I said, "and I don't believe I know who you are." "His name is," Diane started. "I'd like him to tell me himself." The man's jaw tightened slightly. "My name is Brett," he said. "Brett Calloway. I'm a financial advisor. Are you? And do you have a license number I can look up?" Silence. The branch manager, a man named Allen, who introduced himself without making eye contact with anyone, had been standing in the doorway for the last minute. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Holt," he said. "Given the circumstances, we placed a temporary hold on the transfer request. Both account holders need to be present and in agreement for a wire of this size, and since you're now here, well, it seems like there may be some need for clarification before we proceed." "How much?" I asked. Allen looked at Diane. Diane looked at her hands. "The request was for $140,000, Allen said. I had not been prepared for that number. I kept my face still, but something inside me went very quiet. $140,000. That was most of what we had in that account. The savings I'd accumulated over 30 years of working, the money I'd been careful with, the fund I had quietly, privately thought of as our emergency cushion. The thing that let me sleep at night. "We're going to need a few minutes," I said to Allen. "Alone." Allen looked grateful for a reason to leave. Brett Calloway did not leave. I asked him to, and he looked at Diane, and Diane gave the smallest shake of her head, and he stayed. That told me everything I needed to know about the chain of authority in this situation. I took a breath. I looked at my wife. Tell me what's going on. What came out over the next 20 minutes was not the truth, not all of it, not yet. It came in pieces, the way things do when someone has been lying for a long time and suddenly finds themselves in a room with no exits. She said it was an investment. She said Brett was someone she'd met through a colleague. She said she'd been researching it for months. She said she had been going to tell me. She said the timing just hadn't been right. She said I'd been difficult to talk to since I retired. She said she just wanted some financial independence. Brett said nothing. He just sat there with that folder on his lap, and the longer I sat in that room, the more I started to understand that what I was looking at was not a man who'd accidentally gotten involved in a domestic situation. He was too calm. He was watching the conversation the way a contractor watches an installation, professionally, with mild interest, waiting to see whether the job would go through. I excused myself. I went to find Carol. "The man with my wife," I said quietly. "He gave you an ID when you asked. Can you tell me what name was on it?" Carol looked uncertain. Then she said, "The name on the ID was Russell Holt." I stood completely still for a moment. "He showed you an ID with my name on it. It looked legitimate," she said. "That's partly why we called." When I looked at the photo and then looked at him, something didn't add up. He's much younger than your account photo. He had been trying to impersonate me. They had come in together, and he had tried to present as me, and the only reason it hadn't worked was because a bank teller in her 50s had looked at a 40-year age gap and decided to make a phone call. I want to explain something about how I felt standing in that hallway, because I think it matters. I was not angry yet. There's a stage past shock where everything becomes very clear and very methodical, and that's where I was. It's the same place I went when a load-bearing column on a Charlotte job site cracked in 2009, and everyone around me started panicking. You don't fix a structural failure by panicking. You assess, you document, you stop the collapse before you think about the repair. I went back to my truck. I called my attorney, a man I'd used for the closing on our house and an easement dispute with a neighbor years ago, and I left a message explaining the situation. Then I called my son, because I needed someone I trusted to know what was happening. My son Davis is 34 and lives in Columbia, and whatever flaws he has, he is not easily rattled. He told me to stay at the bank, document everything I could, and not sign anything. I went back inside. By the time I returned to the office, Alan had asked Brett to wait in the lobby. I was glad for that. I sat across from Diane again, and this time we were alone, and I could see her more clearly, the way you can sometimes only really see something once you've removed everything that was obscuring it. "How long?" I said. She knew what I meant. "Russell, how long has this been going on?" She looked at the table. "About 8 months." 8 months. I thought about the last 8 months. The way she'd been slightly more distant. The way she'd started taking girls' trips with friends I barely knew. The way she'd gotten a second phone, she said for work, because her company was switching platforms. The way she'd started handling the mail before I got to it. "Is he the only one involved in this?" I asked. "Or is there someone else?" She hesitated. That hesitation was its own answer. "Stephanie," I said. Her face crumpled slightly at the edges, and that was the moment the floor actually fell out from under me. Not the $140,000, not the fake ID, not the 8 months. My daughter. My daughter, who was 40 minutes away, who I had called just last Sunday to see how the garden was coming along, who had called me Dad 4 days ago and asked how I was sleeping. "What does Stephanie have to do with this?" I said flatly. "She introduced us," Diane said. "She knows Brett. They met through her husband's what? His gym," she said. "His gym on Wade Hampton. Brett trains there. Her husband's name was Connor. I had never completely trusted Connor." That was the thought that arrived in my head with perfect, useless clarity. I had never completely trusted Connor, and I had spent 6 years being polite to him at Thanksgiving. I will not describe in detail everything that happened in the 2 weeks that followed, because some of it is still with lawyers and I've been advised to be careful. But I will tell you the shape of it. Diane had not just been planning a single wire transfer. Carol, at my request and with my documentation of the attempted fraud, helped me access the full account history for our joint accounts. Over the previous 7 months, there had been 11 smaller transfers, amounts between $4,000 and $12,000 each, to an account I didn't recognize. Total $66,000, gone before I ever had cause to look. Brett Calloway was not a licensed financial advisor in South Carolina. He was not a licensed financial advisor anywhere as far as my attorney could determine. What he was a man with a history of similar arrangements. We found 2 prior complaints filed with the state attorney general's office, neither of which had resulted in criminal charges because the victims had declined to pursue them. Diane had known about at least one of those prior cases. I found the email. Stephanie had not, I eventually came to believe, known the full extent of what was being planned. She knew her mother and Brett were involved. She had kept that secret, which was its own form of betrayal. But she had not known about the fraud, the fake ID, or the scale of the financial theft. When I sat down with her and laid out what I had found, she went pale and quiet in a way I had never seen from her before. She cried. I believe the crying was genuine. I have chosen to believe it was genuine because the alternative is something I'm not ready to look at yet. Connor knew more than he admitted initially. His lawyer eventually negotiated his cooperation with investigators in exchange for immunity from the fraud charges, which tells you something about how much he actually knew. Brett Calloway was arrested 6 weeks after that Tuesday morning. The charges included identity fraud, attempted theft by deception, and wire fraud. My attorney filed a separate civil suit. The $66,000 is not fully recovered yet, but the attorneys tell me it is recoverable. Diane and I are divorcing. I filed in January. She contested it initially. I think she still believed, even after everything, that there was some version of this story where I would stay. There isn't. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I say it with the same clarity I felt standing in that bank hallway, understanding finally what I was looking at. The house is in my name. The pension is mine. The savings, what's left of them and what will be recovered, are mine. My attorney was very thorough. I still live in Greenville. I still have the cardinal feeder in the backyard, though I moved it to the other window. The one in the sunroom where I've started drinking my morning coffee, since I don't much like the kitchen view anymore. My son drives up from Columbia every few weeks and we watch football and eat badly and don't talk about it more than necessary, which is the correct amount. Stephanie and I are in an uncomfortable, careful place. We talk, we are trying. There are things between us that will need more time than I've had, and there are questions I still ask myself about what I missed, what I should have seen, what I chose not to see, because it was easier. Those questions don't have clean answers, and I've stopped looking for them. What I know is this. I spent 3 decades calculating load tolerances and stress points and the exact conditions under which a structure will fail. I understood those systems. I was good at reading them. It never once occurred to me to apply the same rigor to my own house. Not the one on the blueprints, but the one I'd built out of 26 years of assumptions and trust and morning coffee and cardinals at a feeder hung 6 inches too low. I'm not telling this story because I want sympathy. I don't particularly. I'm telling it because I think there are other people who have sat in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning thinking everything was fine, not knowing yet what the next phone call would cost them. And I want them to know that when the structure fails, when the floor shifts and doesn't shift back, it is possible to still be standing when the dust clears. You assess, you document, you stop the collapse before you think about the repair. And then, eventually, you repair. There's a moment I keep coming back to, not the one in the bank, not the one where I saw my wife's car in that parking lot. The one I keep coming back to is quieter than that. It's the moment I stood in my own kitchen, watching cardinals at a feeder I'd hung 6 inches too low and thought that everything was fine. That's the moment that stays with me. Not because something went wrong there, but because something had already been wrong for a long time, and I hadn't looked. I've thought a lot about what allowed what happened to happen. Not Diane's choices. Those belong to her, and she'll carry them. I mean, what allowed it to continue for 8 months without my knowing. And the honest answer is that I stopped paying attention, not out of laziness exactly, out of something I mistook for trust. I handed over the mail. I accepted the explanation about the second phone. I heard the small inconsistencies and smoothed them over, because looking closely felt like an accusation, and I didn't want to be that kind of husband. What I was actually doing was outsourcing my own judgment. And when you do that long enough, you don't lose your trust in the other person. You lose your trust in yourself. That's the thing I had to rebuild first. Not the savings account, not the legal standing, not even the sense of security. The ability to look at something and trust what I was seeing. To say, this doesn't add up, and mean it and follow it. I spent my whole career doing exactly that, standing in buildings and reading the stress points, the hairline cracks, the angles that were just slightly off. I knew how to assess a structure. I just hadn't been applying it to my own life. That's not a moral failing, exactly, but it's a failure of attention. And attention, I've come to believe, is something you owe yourself. There's also this. Brett Calloway didn't walk into my bank on a Tuesday morning out of nowhere. He found a situation that had been made available to him. That's not blame, not toward Diane, not even toward my daughter, though what she knew and when she knew it is something Stephanie and I are still working through. It's just cause and effect. When the people closest to you are allowed to operate in the dark, when you make it easy out of kindness or avoidance for things to go unexamined, you create the conditions for someone to take advantage of that darkness. The outcome wasn't random. It grew from specific decisions made over months and years, and at some point I have to include my own decisions in that accounting. What I've tried to hold on to, and some days it's harder than others, is that there's a difference between being deceived and being defeated. I was deceived. I'm not defeated. I know that because I'm still here in the same town, drinking coffee in the sunroom instead of the kitchen, watching the same cardinals at a feeder I still haven't moved. The structure failed. I'm still standing in it. Davis drives up from Columbia and we don't talk about it more than necessary. That's the right amount. Stephanie and I are finding our way back to something. That's also the right amount for now. I'll tell you what I'd tell anyone who's sitting in their own version of that parking lot, hands on the wheel, not quite ready to go inside. Go inside. Look at what's there. Do it carefully and do it without flinching, because the thing you're afraid to see is already there whether you look at it or not. The only question is whether you get to respond to it on your own terms. I did, eventually. That's enough.